On the morning of my 40th birthday, I arrived at the cemetery with a lemon cake, a folding chair, and a promise I had carried for 20 years. I thought I would find quiet solitude. I planned to sit by my grandmother's grave, speak to her silently in my mind, and slip away before anyone in my family realized I had left. But as I stepped into Maple Hill Cemetery that day, an unexpected sight stopped me. A man stood right beside my grandmother's headstone, holding a shovel, clearly waiting for me. His name was Walter Beam. He had worked at the cemetery for 35 years. When I approached, he took off his hat and spoke words that sent a chill through me. "Your grandmother knew you would come here on your 40th birthday." I was sure I had misheard him. No one else knew about this private tradition. For 20 years, I had visited my grandmother Rose's grave every June without fail. It was something I kept to myself. My family had long stopped mentioning her, but I never stopped honoring her memory. My grandmother was the kind of woman who remembered everything about everyone. Birthdays, favorite meals, old family tales, and tiny details others forgot. After she passed, I felt it was up to me to keep those memories alive. So every year I brought her the lemon cake she had always loved. That morning, while my relatives were occupied with brunch plans and a family gathering, I stood in the cemetery facing a stranger who seemed to know the impossible. Walter reached into his wallet and took out a small, worn card. The paper appeared older than me. The handwriting was unmistakable. It belonged to my grandmother. The note read, June 14th, 2025. "For Vivian, wait for her, she will come." My hands trembled. My grandmother had written this when I was only 5 years old. Walter explained that back in 1990, soon after my grandfather died, my grandmother had come to him with an unusual request. She paid him to bury something 3 feet behind her headstone. She instructed him never to disturb it, never to open it, and never to mention it unless I showed up on my 40th birthday. "She believed you would be the one who returned," Walter told me. Then he lifted his shovel. I watched as he dug carefully behind the grave. The morning air was perfectly still. The only sound came from the shovel cutting into the soil. Suddenly he paused. The shovel had struck something solid. Beneath a flat stone lay a metal box. Inside the box was a small blue tin, an old photograph, a faded hospital bracelet, and a letter addressed to me. The photograph hit me hardest. It showed my grandmother as a young woman standing in front of a building called St. Agnes, cradling a newborn baby, a baby I had never known about. The bracelet and the tin carried 3 simple words, "Baby girl Merrick." Merrick was my grandmother's maiden name. The date stamped on it was 1958. My mother was born in 1961. My uncle arrived in 1963. The truth could no longer be denied. My grandmother had given birth to another child, a daughter no one in our family had ever spoken of. With shaking hands, I opened the letter. My grandmother explained that at age 20, unmarried, her family had sent her to St. Agnes. In that era, an unwed mother was considered a shame to the family. She had no choice in the matter. After the birth, she was forced to leave her baby behind. Everyone expected her to move on and forget, but she never could. For decades, she searched in silence. She made phone calls, she wrote letters. She quietly looked for the daughter who had been taken from her. Every year, she placed a white rose on the empty plot beside her own grave, not because anyone was buried there, but because she hoped someone would one day come home. At the end of the letter, she wrote, "I would never forget. I was 40 the year I stopped looking. Don't you stop." Those words became my purpose. Yet as I continued my search, I uncovered something even more painful. My family had known far more than they let on. My grandmother had bought 4 cemetery plots under the old elm tree. My grandparents occupied 2. The other 2 had remained empty. My family wanted to sell those plots, move my grandparents to a memorial wall, and use the money for other needs. My mother had said, "The dead don't need anything, the living do." But she was mistaken. Those empty spaces held deep meaning. One of them belonged to the daughter my grandmother had waited for her whole life. I searched through old records and learned that my grandmother had joined an adoption reunion service in 2002. She had kept reaching out, still hoping. Then I discovered something that changed how I viewed my own mother. Her daughter had contacted the family in 2005, 6 months after my grandmother's death. Someone had replied. Someone had told her there was nothing for her here. That someone was my mother. I found the cold, brief letter hidden in my mother's papers. It informed a woman who had searched for 47 years that she did not belong. Her name was June Calloway. I knew I had to find her. After weeks of searching, I located June in Michigan. When she opened the door, I saw my grandmother's face reflected in hers. The same eyes, the same features, the same quiet strength. She was 67 and carried herself like someone long accustomed to disappointment. I told her who I was and showed her the photograph, the bracelet, and my grandmother's letter. At first, she refused to believe it. "I already reached out once," she said. "Your family answered me." But when she examined the proof, the truth sank in. Her mother had never forgotten her. She had been waiting all along. June agreed to return with me. On July 30th, the day my family intended to sell the cemetery plots, everyone gathered at Maple Hill. The documents were prepared. The equipment stood ready. My mother had already signed. Then June arrived. A hush fell over the entire cemetery. My uncle looked at her and recognized our grandmother's face. My mother turned to me and gave me one last ultimatum. "Send her away, or you and I are finished." For the first time, I refused to keep the peace at any cost. I looked at my mother and said, "I love you, but I will not protect a secret that ruined another person's life." Then I introduced June. I told them the truth. She was not an outsider. She was family. She was Rose's firstborn daughter. She was my uncle's sister. She was my mother's sister. I read my grandmother's letter beneath the same elm tree where she had waited for decades. When I finished, my uncle held the old bracelet, his voice cracking. "I had a sister my whole life." He then turned to the cemetery director. "I'm not signing." The sale was halted. The cemetery stayed as it was. The 4 plots beneath the elm tree remained exactly as my grandmother had intended. 2 were occupied. 2 were still waiting. Months later, June began visiting every month. She brought white roses from her own garden, one for my grandmother's grave, and one for the empty plot that had waited her entire life. The once-forgotten corner of the cemetery became the most cherished place there. My uncle calls June every Sunday. He helps repair things around her house because he has never been comfortable with emotional words. My mother and I have not spoken since. Some people say I chose a stranger over my own family, but I learned an important truth. Sometimes the truth feels like betrayal to those who have spent their lives guarding a secret. My grandmother did not leave me money. She left me a responsibility, a blue tin, a lemon cake recipe, and a promise. She taught me that remembering the dead is important, but fighting for the living who were forgotten matters even more. Because every family has someone whose story was buried. Someone whose name was erased. Someone who waited years for another person to find the courage to speak the truth. And sometimes the one who saves a family is not the person who keeps everyone comfortable. It is the one who finally chooses to break the silence.